The Diary of Eleazar Veges, also known as the Apostle of the Mist, from my novel Pillars of Destruction. War is a word that throws one into fear or into joy, depending on which person it is said to. I know what war is, and not by hearsay. In my heart, the word was always identified with the first feeling. My name is Eleazar of the Veges family. When the war began, I was 15, and the eldest heir to the highest title of my family, the rulers of the land called Conmore. Along with my sister and brother, I experienced all the hardships of the person, though who was not fighting at the front lines, but leading battles on maps, being at my father's military meetings. War always starts because of the arrogance of leadership, or because of a resource that everyone wants to own but does not prefer to share. The catalysts of this war were both parameters. Because of the uniqueness and versatility of the mineral found in the state called Kingrad, arrogant and greedy people in power unleashed a large-scale war for the right to possess this resource. A war not only against those who wished to remain the sole owners of the magnum, but also against one another. Human greed knows no bounds, and because of that greed, because of the constraints of people and their subjugation to ethereal desires, even now I distinctly remember the sound of sirens and the smell of death wafting through the air. And the more I remember those distant times, the more I come to the realization that the future appearance of the mist saved humanity from self-destruction. Self-destruction provoked by our own law deeds. Acts that bring only misery. My parents died 6 years after the start of a massive, all-enveloping confrontation, never realizing that by participating in the war, we had made a fatal mistake. My father, squeezing my hand in his, told me his last wish. Take care of your brother and sister, and put your country's well-being above all else. Bring victory to our home. I tried to reason with his sanity, if he had any left, begging him with my last decree to stop the war, to lead our country out of the bloody nightmare for nothing. For even if we had defeated the neighboring, opposing countries, we would not have gotten the magnum because of the geographical remoteness of Kingrad. But he wouldn't listen to me, so I had to promise him. Promise that I would bring his last wish to reality and do everything to defeat our enemies, no matter what losses we suffered. After the funeral procession, my brother, sister, and I remained standing in front of the tombstones, even after everyone had left. I held my brother's, Adrian's, and my sister's, Isley's hands. They sobbed incessantly throughout the funeral, and I just watched. I looked at the names engraved on the tombstones. I read them over and over again and could not believe that our parents, the people closest to us, had left on their children's shoulders the heaviest burden possible. The burden of a war they didn't start and never wanted. But I had not yet anticipated that this burden would very soon be replaced by another, much heavier one. The full moon blessed us that night with its clear light, but little did we know that it would be a portent of something greater. For the three of us, the celestial body began to slowly grow larger and larger, approaching inexorably, seemingly to split the whole world apart while putting us out of our misery. Perhaps that's why we didn't run, but simply watched, until the moon took us into another reality, beyond our full awareness. Hundreds of thousands of stars flashed before my eyes in the darkness of the eternal night, until I saw something that spoke to us three in a language we could understand. It was a creature of incommensurable scale, wrapped in a blanket of multicolored dust of unseen beauty, rushing upward to form three majestic pillars that seemed to pierce both space and time. The creature itself appeared to us almost formless, ghostly, ethereal. I remember the claws protruding from the sides of its heterogeneous torso, with a bottomless pit in the center and a huge eye instead of a head. Or maybe it wasn't an eye at all, but something else, assembled from matter that was unclear to me. Not I nor my brother or sister could fully comprehend all the outward signs of what we were seeing. The only thing we were aware of was a voice coming from everywhere, addressing us. The otherworldly entity came into contact with us. It promised us not only to win the war by destroying all our enemies without harming the people living in their lands, but also to give us strength beyond the reach of ordinary humans, and subsequently to open the whale of life itself, to bring the human race to the peak level of evolution, to enable mankind to outgrow internecine, empty wars and discord. I, as the rightful head of the lands of Conmur, as the one who gave my word to do everything to win the war for Magnum, gave my consent, taking responsibility for the decision I made, assuring Adrian and Ainsley that it was the only right path for us. The otherworldly entity, who evoked in us only indescribable awe and a kind of morbid fear, mingled with infinite respect, said that it would bring grace to our world, a link that would bind a strong chain to its dwelling place, a link called Pillars of Creation. A distant cluster beyond the heavens, a cluster of bright, shining in all colors diamonds, a cluster of dust of the most beautiful and immaculate stars. On the places above our hearts were instantly imprinted the symbols that from that moment on could be passed down from generation to generation by blood. The essence told us that only the bearers of these marks were able to influence the pillars of creation and be connected to them in a diminutive way. As soon as the symbol was placed on my chest, I felt an indescribable fever that spread throughout my body. But just as quickly the fever receded, and it was as if I had had an epiphany. I felt the boundaries of my consciousness expand. It was as if my vision had been freed from the eternal sobbing that prevented me from seeing the full picture of the world. Through an interdimensional tunnel, we were transported to the family estate, where the link of which the essence spoke was formed. These pillars of creation released an incredible amount of white haze, mist, which filled most of the territory around Conmur, destroying the warring neighboring countries through its instantaneous effect on humans. The mist did not spread to the inhabitants of Conmur, as the creature had promised. Because of what happened, the war for Magnum immediately ended in the form in which it was originally fought. We longed to see with our own eyes the results of what had happened, and I ordered a plane to be prepared. We flew over the cities that had become ghost towns. As we landed in former enemy territory, I could not believe my eyes. Not a soul, not a person in sight. It was as if people had never lived there. There were no dead bodies, no skeletons, absolutely nothing. The sight shocked me, but not, as now I understand, in the same way as my brother and sister. What I saw gave me the confidence to cooperate with the otherworldly entity. But Adrian and Ainsley were not so optimistic, seeing the suffering that the unseen destructive force had brought. On our return to the mansion, a familiar, distant voice penetrated our minds. The otherworldly creature said to the three of us that now that we were convinced of its power, now that we had seen the promise kept, it was time to begin what would bring humanity to the peak of evolution, and to unravel the universe's mystery. It is time to begin the full and immediate opening of all people's eyes to the true nature of things. I, at the mutual desire of my brother and sister, asked that we be given some time for reflection and decision-making. We consulted for a long time, and frequently it came to quarrels. Though the call resonated in our minds with fierce force, we all, including me, understood that something else was hidden, something that was the other side of the medal. An omnipotent being would not give a part of its divine power for nothing. There had to be an underlying purpose that the entity was pursuing. Not a high purpose, but an extremely simple one. Nourishment. All living beings feed on something. Without it, there can be no life, which always goes shoulder to shoulder with death. Death had an intention of an otherworldly being. In the bloody war for Magnum, much of the human race died, and the negative emotions released in the process became a lit beacon for the one whose food was emotion, the purest form of universal energy. But I was willing to accept this, the other side of the coin as well. The creature kept its promise. It had ended the war. Conmur was unharmed, and so we had emerged victorious. I had kept my promise to my father and mother, and now I could take humanity to a new stage of development in which there would be no wars, no strife, no bloodshed. Adrian and Ainsley thought otherwise, and I did not share my inspiration, considering them utopia, believing that I was deceiving myself, considering that the call had taken over my innermost being and I was no longer thinking straight. In truth, they were simply afraid of the power they could wield. I could see the fear in their eyes, and transfixed by this restraining feeling, they fled to the remote Kingrad and took refuge there. They even had to part so as not to arouse the suspicion of the government. For the sake of their false understanding of the salvation of humanity, they put an end to the close relationship that had developed between them, a relationship not normally characteristic of brother and sister. Yes, they had been together forever. Even as a child, it seemed to me strange, abnormal. I was the only keeper of that secret, the secret of their love. And in the end, these two betrayed me, betrayed our common goal as soon as there was a shadow of doubt about its rightness. I was left alone with an otherworldly entity whose power over the world was simply divine. But even a god, as it turned out, needed keys to unlock a desired door. So it was, by now a paralyzing fear was gripping me. My shaky mind began to crack, and I didn't know what to do next. I hated my brother and sister, and I was in agony, knowing full well that the otherworldly force was watching me, its eyes always everywhere, though I could not see them. Even now, as I am writing these lines, they are watching me. I can feel it. Having passed through all the circles of my own inner hell, I have made it my unwavering goal to place the human being in the capable hands of a higher power, the power of life and death, the power of creation itself. I will move toward the fulfillment of this goal, which is so clearly visible before me, and it is the only one for me that does not reside in a fog. The pillars of creation show me the way. An entity from the cosmos assured me that the moment of truth would come when people who had reached the peak of evolution would rise to the stars, for a coincidence of circumstances would put everything in its place, and the lost ones would appear in new guises. But though the power of my mark was not enough to bring the plan to full fruition, I myself set in motion the release of a new mist from the pillars of creation that completely flooded my country and, as the other creature promised, transformed human beings. After this event, I received a new body with unimaginable strength, but also an ability to change it into my former human body. At the same time, I no longer needed the food I was used to, but I needed more pure fresh water. My appearance ceased to change, remaining the same as it was at the moment of my conversion. I no longer aged or lost my physical form because of my close physical and mental proximity to the pillars of creation. The people who had no markings turned into beings extremely similar to one another, only with different facial features reflecting those of their initial human forms. But they too, being close to the pillars of creation, could not worry about the physical demise that comes with aging. Every single one of them became faithful followers of our common goal. Since that fateful moment, the mist has been completely, steadily emanating from the pillars of creation. And it will continue to spread until it reaches the walls of Kingrad, and then we shall see whose vision of the true order of things wins, Adrian and Ainsley.